it's not about even the download number, usually. It's about making sure that the people that are actually listening are going to be converted into leads. And so that's where that achievable goal, I think, is so important, because you might set this expectation on yourself and then you get to 10 episodes and you're like, well, I'm not making thousands of dollars from this. I don't have thousands of people listening yet. I'm going to stop podcasting. And that breaks my heart. Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about creating and keeping your podcast goals. As a podcaster, I think it is so important to approach podcasting like you would any other type of content or anything that you're doing for your business. So making sure that you set clear goals, clear expectations. That way you don't set yourself up for failure or feel like, oh my goodness, this is not working. This is failing. Why isn't this working the way I want it to? We don't want to have to stress about that stuff. So setting those clear expectations, creating those podcast goals, and then keeping those goals going forward. So first things first, I have a degree in business management and marketing. And when you are talking about marketing and ensuring that you're creating goals that are actually going to be able to be achieved in marketing, you want to create SMART goals. So SMART, that is an acronym that is used in the marketing space when it comes to goals. So the S stands for specific. You want to make sure that your goals are extremely specific, so that way you don't feel like you're just kind of throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping that something sticks. We don't want that. The M stands for measurable. Can you measure the information or the goal in a way that's actually has like an actual number to it, rather than having it be an arbitrary kind of measure? So when you're talking about measuring your podcast goal, if you want to say, hey, look, I want to grow my audience by X amount, that would be a measurable goal. But just saying, I want to grow my audience, you're not getting specific enough there. So going back to that first one, be specific. So specific and then measurable. The A stands for attainable. You want to make sure that you can reasonably accomplish those goals within the timeline that we'll set with the T. So making sure that these are goals that you can actually achieve, that you can actually accomplish, that are going to be in alignment where they're specific, they're measurable, and they're attainable. Like, I can actually, in my capacity, do this thing. So we've got S is for specific, M is for measurable, A is for achievable. The next goal is relevant. And I think that this is going to be good because you want to make sure that your podcast goals are relevant to what your actual expectations are and where you would like to show up for your audience. So I was recently talking to someone. She had signed up for a podcast consult, and her podcast idea and her business weren't really aligned. And so as she was setting these goals and expectations and like things that she wanted to do with her show, it wasn't really going to work because her topic was too far off from being able to relate it back to her business in a way that was going to generate leads for her. So I told her, look, if you want to talk about this topic, great, but you have to know that you might not achieve your goals and you might not be able to turn your listeners into leads if the topic isn't relevant. If the content isn't as relevant to your ideal listener and your goal is to turn those listeners into leads, I'm not sure that that's going to really work. So make sure that your goals are relevant. The T stands for time bound or time based. So actually having a set, hey, look, I'm going to do this podcast for 6 months. This is my consistency. This is how I'm going to show up. And this is my goal to reach by the end of 6 months. This is where I think people get a little confused also. They want to create goals that are going to be achieved in 2 weeks of launching. And I'm sorry to say that that's not really going to work. So make sure that when you are creating these goals and you put a deadline on them, that it's actually a deadline that you can meet, and it's a deadline that makes sense for podcasting. So 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. Those are timelines that actually make sense for podcasting goals. So what are some goals that you can make for your podcast? One goal you could have is that you want to make it past 7 episodes, right? Like you want to actually beat the statistic that says that you can't make it past 7 episodes. So maybe you want to launch with enough to say, hey, look, I made it past here. Maybe your goal is that you want to make a positive impact and you would like people to connect with you and tell you that you have made a positive impact on their life. So maybe your goal is that 3 people reach out to you in the next 6 months to tell you something impactful that your show has accomplished in their life. Maybe you want to get a certain number of downloads within a time frame. For that, I would definitely recommend looking at your podcast host and seeing what their statistics are for people to achieve a certain number of downloads within a certain time frame. I know Libsyn has a statistic that says that if your podcast episode gets over 145 downloads within its first 30 days, it does better than 50% of the shows that are out there. This is another reason why I say that downloads can tend to be arbitrary numbers, and it's not always about the downloads. It's about actually being able to create content that your audience wants and ensuring that they're actually going to turn into leads. These goals, especially when you're talking about download numbers, they tend to be arbitrary numbers, and I'm not sure that it's worth getting distracted by the number of downloads as it is saying, okay, how many new clients did I get that listened to my show? This is where I think so many people mess up with their podcast goals because they think, I'm going to launch this podcast and I'm going to have thousands of downloads and it's going to be fantastic. And that's not how it's going to go. I'm sorry to say that most of the time you will not get a ton of downloads within the first 7 days or the first 14 days or even the first 30 days. Unless you already have a significant audience that is large and engaged, you're not going to be able to achieve the goals that you might set out. So I was recently working with someone, I was consulting for them for their podcast, and they said that they had gotten 4,000 downloads on 9 episodes, and they were disappointed with that number. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. That is fantastic. I have clients who have been podcasting for 6 months. They have a weekly show and they're not at 4,000 downloads. It's not about even the download number, usually. It's about making sure that the people that are actually listening are going to be converted into leads. And so that's where that achievable goal, I think, is so important, because you might set this expectation on yourself and then you get to 10 episodes and you're like, well, I'm not making thousands of dollars from this. I don't have thousands of people listening yet. I'm going to stop podcasting. And that breaks my heart, because obviously I love podcasting and I love people being able to use their voice in a way that connects them with their audience in an impactful way, right? Like, that is my jam. That's what I love. So when I see people create unrealistic goals that they can't achieve, I don't want that for you. I want you to be able to actually achieve your goals. So make sure that they are achievable for you. at your capacity. So we've been talking about this capacity for a while, and we'll have a bonus episode coming up soon talking about how your podcast is not as important as your mental health. Your mental health is so much more important, and making sure that you have the capacity to be able to show up for your audience. You want to make sure that you are not setting yourself up for failure because you are overextending yourself or putting too much pressure on yourself to achieve a certain goal. So what is your capacity to be able to even achieve that goal? Maybe your goal is to grow your social media following. So maybe you say, look, I want to grow my social media by 300 new, very, very aligned fans by 6 months via my podcast. And so you know that as you're creating content for your podcast, you're going to be redirecting people back to your social media. And that's the only place you're going to send them. Maybe you want to increase the number of email subscribers you have. And so you create a freebie that is specific to your podcast. Maybe you're using the bit.ly or something like that in order to track those metrics, and always directing people to that freebie via your podcast. So when you're creating these goals, it's going to allow you to know where you need to focus your time and attention on your podcast. And you don't have to get distracted by the sponsors or the charts, or did I rank in this category, or did I get thousands of downloads? Like, it's not going to be about that because you're focused on one specific goal. And your goal is to achieve that goal. And so you want to make sure that you're able to accomplish it and get it done within the time frame that you've set. So that's where those SMART goals really come in handy, of making sure that you do have specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based goals. Keeping those goals is going to be important. So how do you keep those goals? I recommend that every month, as you are planning your podcast content, you look at your goal. What is your goal? What is that thing that you would like to achieve via your podcast? Is it working? Is it not? Do you need to tweak anything? That's going to allow you to keep those goals, and you won't get distracted by all of the vanity metrics that are out there for podcasts. All right. I want to know what your podcast goals are. Send me a DM on Instagram and let me know. Say, Alicia, here's my goal. Hold me accountable. I want to try to see if I can do this. And I'll also be happy to give you any tips, tricks, or strategies to help you achieve that goal. Have a fantastic rest of your week, and I will catch you guys next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.